I'm David Willis in London, and this is BBC World News America. Chinese fighter jets fly close to the coast of Taiwan as Beijing halts cooperation with the US on climate change and other key issues. Israel launches multiple airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, killing a senior commander of the Palestinian group Islamic Jihad. At least 10 people have died, including a child. The US job market has defied fears of a slowdown, adding 500,000 jobs in July. And gangs in Colombia are recruiting vulnerable children as violence returns there. We have a special report.
The writing here tells drivers to put their windows down or expect bullets, and it's from FARC, the People's Army. Supposedly, the FARC demobilised nearly 6 years ago, but you'd never tell from this.
For those of you watching on PBS and around the globe, welcome to World News America. China is halting cooperation with the US in several key areas, including climate change, military talks, and efforts to combat international crime. The new measures follow a trip to Taiwan by a US congressional delegation led by the senior Democrat Nancy Pelosi. China views the visit as a challenge to its claims of sovereignty over Taiwan, a self-ruled island which sees itself as distinct from the mainland. Well, our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes sent this report from the capital, Taipei.
For the second day in a row, China has continued its military intimidation of Taiwan. At least 68 Chinese fighter jets are reported to have crossed into Taiwanese-controlled airspace. This video, broadcast on Chinese television this evening, shows just how close some of them came to the Taiwanese coast. In the background, those are the mountains of central Taiwan. China has also announced a long list of retaliation against America, including personal sanctions on Nancy Pelosi. But in Taipei, Foreign Minister Joseph Wu told me he has no regrets about inviting the US House Speaker to visit the island.
The Taiwanese government, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has been working very hard in expanding Taiwan's international space, making friends with important international leaders or trying to connect more with like-minded partners around the world, like Speaker Pelosi. To have an opportunity to visit Taiwan is very significant to allow the international community to understand that Taiwan is a democracy.
It's not just Taiwan's democracy that is threatened by China. It's a big chunk of the world's economy. 1 hour drive south of Taipei, these are the huge fab plants of the world's most important maker of advanced microchips. It's amazing to think that in these huge buildings behind me here, they manufacture around 2/3 of the world's most advanced microchips. And in that building over there, currently under construction, they're going to start next year making the next generation of even more advanced chips. That makes this one corporation, TSMC, absolutely vital to the world's modern economy. It also makes this place very vulnerable. If only for this selfish reason, Joseph Wu says the world should care what happens to Taiwan.
And TSMC, of course, is the most important chip producers here in Taiwan. And it's also the most important chip producers around the world. And so you can see that without the computer chips here in Taiwan or without the TSMC, the international community is going to suffer.
A Chinese blockade of Taiwan could make the worldwide chip shortage caused by the COVID pandemic look like a minor blip on the world economy. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Taipei.
I'm going to take you to the Middle East now, where at least 10 Palestinians, including a commander of the Islamic Jihad group, have been killed in Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip. An infant was also among the victims. Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid said the strikes were a precise counter-terror operation against an immediate threat. Well, as he spoke, rocket fire was launched from Gaza towards Israel in retaliation, reportedly reaching the south of Tel Aviv. Well, our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell has more details now.
Well, we've had these dozens of rockets fired by Palestinian militants from Gaza towards the center of Israel, even warning sirens going off in some suburbs of Tel Aviv. Most sirens going off, though, in the south of the country. At the moment, we're not getting any reports of a direct hit or injuries on the Israeli side, but there has been quite intense rocket fire. Israeli media reporting that in just half an hour, there were some 70 rockets that were fired. We've seen quite a lot of interceptions, I have to say, by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Now, all of this followed Israeli airstrikes and also artillery strikes on Gaza. They were in the south of the Gaza Strip. Also, that high-rise tower building was hit in the center of Gaza City. And we've had the comments by Yair Lapid, the Israeli caretaker prime minister, in his TV address, but he also said that he was not allowing militant organizations in Gaza, in his words, to set the agenda, because all of this goes back several days to when Israel arrested a senior Islamic Jihad leader in the West Bank. There was a deadly exchange of fire during his arrest. One Palestinian was killed, and afterwards Islamic Jihad did threaten to retaliate. That led then to a lockdown, a partial lockdown, in the south of Israel, close to Gaza, where there are several Israeli towns and villages that were very badly affected by road closures, that kind of thing. And then Israel now saying that it had been prompted to launch this new military operation.
Yolande Nell there. The US job numbers were released on Friday, and they outstripped even President Biden's prior optimism. 582,000 jobs were added in July, lowering the rate of unemployment in the US to levels last seen before the onset of the pandemic. Nonetheless, concerns remain about the state of the world's largest economy, with inflation currently at a 40-year high, of course, and worries about the possibility of a recession. So where do today's job numbers leave us? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Betsy Stevenson, former chief economist at the US Department of Labor. Ms. Stevenson, thank you very much for joining us on World News America. President Biden hailed these as more people working than at any other time in American history today. Ultimately, I suppose, though, this could be bad news, couldn't it, for the president, given that it seems to suggest that the Federal Reserve's attempts to soften the economy and slow down the rate of inflation are failing?
Well, I think that's too simplistic an understanding of the relationship between what the Fed's trying to do and job growth. The Fed doesn't necessarily need people to lose jobs in order to bring inflation down. What they need to do is bring down demand. Employers have been facing, demand that they simply can't meet for months. A lot of these industries that are recovering from the pandemic, that lost a lot of workers, they're seeing their customers queuing at their door and they simply haven't been able to serve them. So what we need to see is that's great if they can hire more people so that they can serve those customers. And we also want to see that demand come down a little bit so that we don't see people queuing at their doors. If we can bring demand down as well as increase the capacity of these businesses to serve their customers, we're going to bring inflation down. The Fed's tool is really just bringing demand down. So the Fed's focused on that, but they don't want to see businesses get rid of their employees because that actually makes it harder for them to fight inflation.
Yet on Thursday, the Bank of England announced that the UK was on the verge of what could be a recession, an economic downturn there. How do you reconcile these competing views of the economy, given President Biden's optimism and his suggestion that the US isn't heading for a recession?
Well, let's start with what we're seeing in the United States, which is in the United States, consumers spend. And that is what we want to see consumers pull back a little bit. That's the demand reductions that the Fed's aiming for with those higher interest rates. But we don't need them to pull back so that we have a recession. Whenever you're trying to cool the economy, there's always an increased risk of a recession. Maybe you cool it too much and people pull back demand too much, right? So people stop buying things, they stop traveling, they stop going to restaurants, and then all of a sudden those businesses start laying people off. There's always a risk of that. But when we look at what's happening in the US economy, we clearly see cooling when we look at the GDP numbers because GDP decreased in the first quarter and the second quarter, but we see consumers are continuing to spend. There's plenty of jobs that are growing. Corporate earnings remain high. So there's lots of, where's that strength coming from the U.S.? It's coming from the fact that people came into this period with really high balance sheets, both corporations and households that have a lot of savings. That's helping out a lot. I think this situation is just different from the UK.
Skeptics among us might say that it is in Joe Biden's interest to play up the wage rises, play up the number of jobs that are being taken up, simply because people are hurting right now. Already, we are seeing the effects of inflation.
But nobody likes inflation, and inflation makes it harder to spread that family budget around and buy the things that you need to buy for your family. Absolutely true. Nothing hurts more than unemployment. Unemployment devastates families. It is something that many workers never recover from. Many, particularly older people who lost jobs in the 2008 recession, never worked again. People will find that unemployment is incredibly painful in a way that inflation is like, think about it, it's a little bit of pain for a few people, whereas inflation's a little bit of pain for a lot of people. Unemployment's a lot of people. So I absolutely think it's the right thing to tout higher employment as a good thing, even while we need to take actions to bring inflation down.
Betsy Stevenson, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on World News America. A look at the other news of the day now, and the President of Russia and Turkey have agreed to boost trade and increase energy cooperation at a meeting in the Russian city of Sochi. The agreement includes switching some Turkish energy payments to rubles, a move which will help Russia following harsh Western sanctions on Russia's financial system. The two leaders also emphasized the importance of grain shipments out of Ukraine. And Russia and Ukraine are reporting that shelling has hit the site of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Both sides blame the other for the attacks, which are said to have also hit nearby high-voltage power lines. Ukraine's state nuclear energy company, Enerhoatom, called the attacks a provocation by the Russian side, adding that no radioactive leaks had been recorded. This weekend, Colombia's new president, Gustavo Petro, is due to be sworn in as the country's first ever leftist president in a country that's been racked by decades of civil war. It was nearly 6 years ago that the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, otherwise known as FARC, laid down their weapons in a peace deal. And whilst violence may have fallen overall, dissidents and armed gangs have moved in to fill the gap created by the absence of the FARC. Our South America correspondent Katie Watson sent this report from one of the worst affected areas, the Calcuc Valley in western Colombia.
This lush valley holds many secrets, and in these mountains, the illegal drug trade thrives. The indigenous Nasa community is celebrating their new year, a time to kick back. But the community's suffering. With more armed gangs in the region, indigenous children are the most at risk of being recruited. 13-year-old Derli is one of them. She ran away from home, tempted by money offered to her by FARC dissidents, but she soon regretted it.
We learned how to use guns, learned how to kill people and tie them up. They tied me up, made me starve. I had to drive a motorbike while they executed someone. I never wanted to do that, but if you didn't, they would punish you or kill you.
One female fighter took pity on Derli and helped her escape in the dead of night. But the nightmare continued.
I got death threats. One morning I woke up to find the armed group surrounding my house. My family hid me in a room.
People's lives here are dictated by crime. FARC members who never laid down their weapons, paramilitaries or criminal gangs, they're all competing for territory and recruits.
The writing here tells drivers to put their windows down or expect bullets, and it's from FARC, the People's Army. Supposedly, the FARC demobilized nearly 6 years ago, but you'd never tell from this.
Luz Marina helps track down vulnerable kids, either before they're recruited or rescuing them after. More than 18,000 children are thought to have been forced to join the now demobilized FARC guerrillas over a 20-year period. But today, she says the situation feels worse.
The gangs come along, take out wads of cash, tell the kids to buy what they want. It's no longer a guerrilla that fights for the people, because it's killing the people and it's taking our young ones. They are the seeds that are going to work our land.
Land that's still full of illegal crops, like these coca plantations, in plain sight of authorities. It makes talk of curbing the cocaine trade and the violence associated with it farcical. The peace deal was meant to rein in cocaine production, but it keeps soaring. And farmers here carry on. When you can get just 15 cents for a kilo of oranges, but coca or marijuana pays you hundreds of times more, it's hard to say no.
We're not narcos. We don't have alternatives. The peace deal on paper was very elegant. We were promised everything, but actually it delivered nothing.
And young Colombians pay the price. Giovanni got $400 to join a gang. He's lost friends as young as 11 to the violence.
When I first picked up a gun, I felt adrenaline. It was something I liked. I wanted to shoot more and more, but the reality is, a fight isn't the same as just shooting alone.
His dad, Daniel, is an indigenous guard, protecting his community from the likes of armed gangs. He didn't expect it to happen to his own family.
I felt so much sadness and pain thinking I might lose my son. The first thing you think is, how did I fail?
But in these parts of Colombia, the right path is a hard one. So few young people are able to shape their future the way they want. Katie Watson, BBC News in Western Colombia.
The violence confronting Colombia ahead of the swearing-in of the country's new president this weekend. Across the globe, climate change has worsened the frequency, intensity and the impact of extreme weather events. In the past month, for example, abnormally heavy monsoon rains in Pakistan have killed 550 people, forcing families to relocate and causing food shortages throughout the country. Today in France, the government activated a crisis unit to cope with an historic drought, which the Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, called the worst ever recorded in the country. And in the US, officials have been grappling not only with wildfires, but also flooding and extreme heat, in the light of which the Senate is now poised to pass a major climate control bill, which would make unprecedented investments in clean energy. Well, earlier on, I spoke with the climate change law specialist, Romney Webb, to discuss the significance of this bill. President Biden has called this bill the largest investment in clean energy ever, but how much difference could it actually make, and how far will it go, do you think, to conforming the US to its promises made during the Paris Accord?
Well, I think if the act passes, it will be a huge step forward in the US's fight against climate change. Currently, of course, the US is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And the Biden administration has set really ambitious emissions reductions targets, but so far they haven't been backed up by much in the way of concrete action. The Inflation Reduction Act would change that. It would really drive significant emissions reductions by accelerating the transition to cleaner sources of electricity like wind and solar, and supporting the use of that clean electricity in other sectors like transportation and buildings.
Now, Joe Biden has consistently sought to link matters such as climate change to investment and indeed to jobs. But would this actually boost the economy of the United States in that way, do you think?
Absolutely. Some of the initial modelling that's been done suggests that the Inflation Reduction Act could create about 1.5 million new jobs in the United States by 2030. You know, it's proposing huge investments in renewable energy and electric vehicles, all of which will create, good, well-paying jobs in things like manufacturing and other sectors.
We're talking about increased use of wind turbines, solar panels and so on, but let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are the provisions of this bill that will actually make an impact on climate change, do you think?
Well, it includes expansion of existing tax credits for things like renewable generation, wind and solar generation. It also includes funding for households, for families to electrify their housing, to swap out gas and oil-fired heating for cleaner electric heating. It includes incentives for electric vehicles, funding for the rollout of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and also funding for investments in climate-friendly agriculture, all of which could help to drive down emissions.
And the vote on this bill comes just as China has announced that it's severing any communication with the United States on a range of matters following Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, including climate change. Now, how much of a blow is that for the global community?
It is certainly a blow, but I think the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act will be really important in signaling to the international community that the United States is serious about addressing climate change and serious about achieving the commitments that it's made to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and hopefully spur other countries to do the same.
Romany Webb, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on World News America.
Thank you.
When the Supreme Court of the United States ruled to remove a woman's constitutional right to an abortion, several states immediately certified laws banning or restricting access to the procedure. Others made moves to ensure the right will be preserved. And abortion providers in these so-called haven states say that they're being overwhelmed by the increased demand. Our West Coast correspondent Sophie Long has this report.
Even before the official ruling came, many Californians made it clear they would fight to protect a woman's right to choose.
Women and girls will die.
Gloria Allred says she was raped at gunpoint in the 1960s. That was traumatic, but she says it was the illegal abortion she had after that nearly killed her. Now a high-profile lawyer, she's determined to keep the procedure safe and legal.
These bans on abortion are not going to stop abortions. It just means that women and girls will not be able to obtain safe and legal abortions. Many of them will have to resort to the back alley abortions, such as the one that I had.
California is what's known as a haven state. There's been a push to protect access to the procedure here and to help women who come from states where it's been banned. In November, Californians will vote on whether to protect the right to abortion in the state's constitution.
A woman has a right to decide when she is going to become a mother.
Our rights begin in the womb. Little girls' rights begin in the womb. Yes, they do.
But as this altercation outside a clinic in the liberal city of San Francisco shows, it is a deeply divisive issue.
No, I'm expanding on that, if you'd let me finish, please.
And in rural California, in the heat of the Central Valley, you find a deeply conservative pocket of a liberal state. This is Redding, where running an abortion clinic isn't easy and it hasn't always been safe.
One of the things we experienced in our history was firebombs. We had 4 firebombs in this site. We have had picketing nearly from the day we opened at this site, still continuing to this day.
For our sinners, now and at the hour.
Outside, emotions run as high as the temperature.
If she's pregnant, she's planning to carry that baby to term and have it adopted. And you assumed that she was doing something that you were against.
We love her, there's help here for her, and we love her.
Be on your conscience, and it should be on your conscience, because what you're doing is not right.
Our government is really pushing, almost encouraging now to open our doors and use our tax dollars to bring women from other states in to have abortions, which is, to us, both legally, but more importantly, morally wrong.
Many who believe in a woman's right to choose feel the predominantly pro-choice Democratic Party has done too little, way too late. They want people to vote in November's midterm elections, but without a clear national plan to protect abortion rights, it will be difficult to convince those outraged by their lack of one that it's worth it. Sophie Long, BBC News, Northern California.
I'm David Willis. Many thanks for joining us here on World News America.